Hi there. So anyway, it's kind of interesting. They called me up about 5 minutes ago and said, "Are you speaking today?" And I was like, "Yeah, I speak at 10 o'clock." They're like, "No, you speak now. There was an adjustment to the schedule." I go, "I know. I looked at the thing. I'm looking online." And they're like, and this I don't get. I blame them for this. But anyway, what happened was my computer literally still says 10 o'clock because I don't, when I get to a new time zone, I don't bother having, I don't want my computer to readjust the time zone. And so for some reason, they have this dynamic time on the system depending on your time zone. And I don't know, I just think that's stupid since I didn't pay any attention to that. So anyway, um, actually, that's kind of relevant to my presentation too. So here's the thing, when when I started saying, "Hey, I want to speak in the Cayman Islands because this event sounds really cool," I'm like, what type of talk can I give for this? And then I'm thinking, let's talk about scuba diving. So if I go scuba diving, it'll all be tax deductible and everything, like a business expense. So it is. And I had to do my research, of course, while I was here. So that's a given. So anyway, with that in mind, because actually, let me go through the presentation because it starts covering a lot. So the first time I ever heard the phrase, "you can't stop stupid," was when I was taking my instructor class. And this guy, what's John's last? John Kaiser. This is the course director that I took it from. The guy like has certified probably the most divers for PADI in like history or something at some point in time. And he's local to me, and they're the local dive shop. So I just randomly wandered in there and I started taking classes. I liked it, so I kept taking another class because there's no reason to dive in Maryland. Honestly, the diving pretty much anywhere except the Caribbean anywhere near here really sucks. So anyway, the only reason I would take diving or I would be able to go diving was to keep taking classes. So eventually I finally like worked my way up like through the ranks. And then it was like, do I actually want to be a professional instructor? I'm like, I don't really care, but it's a good excuse to go diving more. So anyway, I went ahead and I did that. It also makes diving tax deductible because if I ever have to go on a refresher dive, it's to refresh my skills as part of my professional responsibilities. But anyway, we were sitting in the class, and John's the type who mumbles, and he was mumbling. It's like, no matter what you do, you can't stop stupid. Some student, you tell them what to do, no matter what happens, they're gonna do it. You just can't stop stupid. And I'm like sitting there thinking, this whole course is about stopping stupid. It's about dive standards. It's about pretty much what you do to plan for people being stupid. And there was sorry, I remember once, like, so just a heads up, the title of my, well, second most recent book is You Can Stop Stupid, by the way. And, I also hear in cybersecurity, a world-renowned ex-hacker, and I kind of almost throw up in my mouth as I say that, I'm not going to mention the name, was quoted as saying, "You can't patch stupid." I'll just give you a hint. As a cybersecurity professional, patching stupid is your job because you can't stop it from existing, but it's your job to stop the results from people being stupid. And frankly, behind every stupid user is a stupider security professional in general. So you got to start thinking that as well. Because if you know the user's going to do something stupid and you don't say, "Hey, the user's going to do something stupid, let me do something about that in advance," that's on you. But anyway, the first time I heard this was back in my diving course. And I'm sitting there thinking, again, we are taking hundreds of hours of training to stop stupid. So let me tell you about my stupid. And anyway, I've had probably 4 near-death experiences, maybe more. I've lost count. That's how bad I am at this. And one of them involves scuba diving. And I have a sea lion on here because it's a nice picture, but also because it was ironically during a sea lion dive, and the sea lion literally had nothing to do with this. But anyway, it's a nice picture. So anyway, what was happening was I was on a dive where you go out, and this was in Curacao, you dive out, and then you sit someplace, and then the trainer brings over a sea lion, and then the sea lion goes among people and everything like that. So then we were finishing up the dive, and what happened was, this was in Curacao, and the waves really, really suck. And so what happened was at this resort where I was, they had this, and it's hard for me to describe, but they had like a wall of rocks around the dolphin enclosure because this was like an aquatic park type of thing where they had sea lions, they had dolphins, but then they had kind of also built around it a little cove. So when you went down, you wanted to go diving, you got in the water in the cove, and then you dove, and then you underwater went around. And so what happened was we dove in the cove, went around underwater, and then as we were coming back from this, because I just remember as we get to kind of where the wall is, we see a light, because when you're underwater, all of a sudden you see like lights to the side, and that's kind of where I thought the cove was, because there's not like perfect visibility down there. And what happened was, all of a sudden, I saw a light, and I followed the light. It wasn't like Poltergeist, Carrie Ann, stay away from the light. But anyway, there I was. I followed the light, unlike Carrie Ann. And I went ahead, followed the light, and then all of a sudden, I realized I'm at a wall. And then I start and then all of a sudden, a wave picks me up and puts me on top of this rocky ledge. Because what happened was, for the dolphin enclosure, they had little holes in the rocks to allow water from overflowing, going back and forth and so on. So anyway, there I was on this ledge. And then I decided, okay, this kind of sucks and I shouldn't be here. So I tried to just go back into the water. Well, what happened was there were just like series of small waves which kind of kept me there, and then big waves would come and slam me into the rocks. And that really sucked, I'll tell you that much. So there I was waiting for trying like a couple times while the little waves were coming in, trying to get back, but it was still enough to keep me there. And then the big waves would come, and I would have to grab onto these coral rocks, and my fingers were bleeding because coral rock really sucks. It's not like a nice rock. It's like coral. So then what happens, there I was on this, and then the dive master sees me, and he's like, come on, come on back in. And he's there floating like 20 feet away. I'm like just shaking my head, because when you're diving, the things you're trained to do is to keep your regulator in your mouth and your mask on no matter what, if you're in potential harm. So I just kept this, and I just kept shaking my head no, and the guy thought I was panicking. Real panic means you tear off your mask and don't have your regulator in your mouth, if you're a good instructor, by the way. But anyway, what happened was, there I was, and then the dive master decided he's going to get on the rocks with me to help me off. And then he realized why I was still on the rocks. So there I was in that case. And then what happened was, remember, there was a little hole into this dolphin enclosure. It used to have like rebar, but it all kind of rusted away. And before this, I also took some training, because I also dive to help maintain oyster reefs in the Chesapeake Bay to try to keep that cesspool clean. And what happened was, then it was like, okay, how do you get yourself kind of small? And I took off my equipment and kept on it, pushed the equipment through, and then went through the hole. And then I was in the dolphin enclosure. And now I'm going to curse here, because dolphins can be real assholes. That's a given. Everybody thinks dolphins are sweet, smart things. They can be territorial bastards. So there I was thinking, I'm either going to get killed by the rocks or potentially have be a play toy for dolphins. Because one of my friends, I'll talk about him later, is a Navy SEAL. And I'm like, what was it? Did you ever work with like dolphins or sea lions? He's like, oh yeah. He's like, dolphins really suck, because dolphins are trained in the military to do force protection and go around ships. And if they see enemy divers, to just keep poking at them and keep poking at them. He's like, you could get away from sea lions if you hug the bottom, but dolphins at echolocation, he's like, those little assholes will keep going for your heart. I'm like, what do? He's like, curl up in a ball and hope they pull you out quickly. So there I was, after everything else happened, expecting to curl up in a ball and getting pulled out. But luckily, somebody saw it and pulled us up on top of the rock. So anyway, that's my near-death experience. What did I do? I did something really stupid by ending up on the rocks. But again, it was a lot of things right by not panicking, by making sure I kept my mask on, by making sure, because if I ever took the mask off, even in my hand, it literally would have been pushed away really quickly. But again, kept everything on and then started using the training. It's like, okay, how do I get through that little hole? And started using my equipment to get out of there. And then having sense enough to say, let me stay near these rocks so I'm not swimming in the middle of the dolphin pool and stuff where the dolphins can like use me as a play toy again. But anyway, that's kind of my stupidity. And I've done stupid things more than that. So now here's the thing. A lot goes wrong in scuba diving, but it can be pretty safe. Now, one thing is I mentioned I ended up on the rocks. That was obviously a really dumb thing and things that end up going wrong. I was once bit by a green sea turtle because I was also a volunteer diver at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. And what happened was we had this green sea turtle in this tank, and we were not allowed to release it because one of the flippers was it got caught up in fishing line, and they had to remove the flipper, so they couldn't release it back out in the wild. And what would happen was we'd keep it for all the tourists and everything, and we would have to hand feed this sea turtle like we're supposed to feed it cabbage and broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and things like that. We're not supposed to feed it shrimp because in the same tanks there were stingrays, much like you have in Stingray City out there. And so, we would feed the rays shrimp because rays love shrimp and the tourists love to see these, stingrays give all the divers hickeys and stuff like that crawling up and down us. So there we were, the attraction bigger than the rays. And what happened though was some of the other divers would still feed the turtle the shrimp. And there I was, and I would never feed the turtle the shrimp. But one time, again, I was feeding the rays. Other divers were trying to take care of the turtle. And then I bent over on my back because, water started filling the mask, just bent over or turned over. And I'm holding the shrimp this while I'm doing that and clearing it. And all of a sudden, I just feel something clamp down on my hand. And that was a nice little sea turtle because all those other bastard divers would feed the turtle shrimp. So the turtle did not know, hey, if a diver is not actually trying to feed you shrimp, don't use their hands as a feeder. So anyway, then there was another time I ran out of air. And literally, I was like, and I'm going to get to this later, but all scuba professionals are not the same quality. And one time I was on this early dive, one of my first dives out after instruction, and I couldn't get down. And then the dive master, oh, you got to stop panicking. I go, I'm not panicking. I'm literally trying to show I'm pulling myself down the rope and I'm still being held up because there was air in the BCD no matter what I did. And the diver and then he's like, finally I managed to get down there by putting lots of rocks in my pockets. And then what happens is I'm going around and after a little bit longer, all of a sudden I'm sucking in and I was like, I think I'm out of air. And I'm sitting there, it's I can't be out of air. And then I look at look at the little air regulator, and it's I'm out of air. And then I'm sitting there thinking, do I have to do one of those stupid ahs and go up slowly like they train you? And I'm yeah, I have to do that. So anyway, I did that, got to the surface, then the dive master comes, and I go, I'm out of air. He's you can't be out of air. I'm show him. He's oh, you're just breathing too much. I'm it's not the fact my equipment has more air than I do. Anyway, that's, bad equipment, even when it's supposed to be good. Leaking masks, you do have masks that leak no matter what. You use a dive hood. Sometimes it really screws things up. But these things happen over time. And then here's a good one. The reason I have a picture of a moray eel here, I was once on a dive trip at a Fort Lauderdale, and this one guy was diving, and he was trying to, catch lobsters. And so what happened was we all went our ways. It wasn't a guided dive, and we were just doing a drift dive along the coast. And then I get up top, and there's this guy all with his hand bandage up, dripping blood down his arm. He's and I'm what? He's oh, I'm okay. I'm I don't care if you're okay. I'm just curious what happened. And then he's well, I was feeling under a reef, and then to catch lobsters, and then apparently there was an eel under there. And so what happened was the guy who was an experienced diver, you're supposed to know to have a pole and to use poles to go under so you don't get bit by eels and other bad things like lionfish and stuff. And for those of you that don't know, eels are alien because this is a moray eel. That does not look very scary with the teeth. The problem is it has a second set of jaws where the outer jaw, when it bites something, just grabs it, and the second jaw, like alien, juts out with lots of big fangs, grabs it, and then pulls it back in. So the guy basically shredded his hand because the eel tried to pull his hand in. And so what happened was that was this guy. And then I went back to Fort Lauderdale. I went to the dive shop. And I was like, yeah, I went out diving with you guys. It's like, oh, yeah, the guy told us how he fought an eel. I'm like, that's not what happened. So anyway, it's kind of like the guy that caught the fish this big that got away. So anyway, and here's the thing that comes back. Despite all these things going wrong, no training is ever waste of time. There's bad classes that I've taken. There's classes I thought were pretty much a waste that I had to take. But at the end of the day, what these classes did was they breed skill and familiarity. The more you're underwater, the more comfortable you are. The more training you have. Like, I would never think that that training I did for the Magathie River Association, where like we had to put paper towels in our mask to blind us, essentially, because they wanted us to train for zero visibility, which essentially what diving in some places is. So they trained us with that. They trained us how to get through obstacles. And there I was, having to get through obstacles to get out of a rock into a dolphin tank. And all this stuff kind of comes together because the more you dive, the more comfortable you are, the less you'll panic and so on, and know what to do when things go wrong. And then there's also the question, and you never know when you're going to need your skills. So there was during my rescue diver class, like our checkout dives, and this is actually pretty funny, except somebody almost got themselves killed. During the rescue diver class, all of us were like in this deep end of a quarry in the middle of nowhere. And out of the nowhere, this guy just pops up and freaking out, again, tears off his mask, throws the regulator out exactly like what a panic diver would be like. And we're all looking at each other. There's 8 of us in this class. And we're like, is this like a pop quiz or something? Like, did they put somebody down there to test us? And then it turns out this guy, so then he was like there. And then you have, and the worst place to ever come up is in the middle of a like first aid rescue diver class in a panic. Because then you have like 8 people, okay, breathe slowly, do this, calm down. And I'm like, I just went away because that guy had more than enough to worry about. All these people telling him to calm down was going to freak him out more than whatever he was freaked out at that point. And what happened was there he was. And it turns out that this diver, he was actually doing some what they call tech diving training, which is like, multiple air tanks of different types of air and stuff like that. And apparently he was taking a class, freaked out, and just popped up. And then all of a sudden, we're all sitting there thinking, wait a second, if he's the student, and then we're like, where's your buddy? He's like, oh, it's just me and the instructor. Then we're thinking, do we have to form rescue parties to go down and find the instructor now? And then all of a sudden, like 3 minutes later, his instructor, oh, I guess he just freaked out. And we're like, instructor of the year material there. So anyway, I had a son with like he ended up having whooping cough, and all of a sudden it's like he was choking. I did the Heimlich maneuver I learned in one of my emergency first responder class. It had nothing to do with like stopping whooping cough, but apparently it helped get forcing air in and out. So that's like those skills. I mentioned getting caught on the rocks. Then there's other times. There was one time I was diving over in the Bahamas, and all of a sudden you look around and there's like these 8-foot Caribbean reef sharks just swimming alongside the divers. Now, if you're not used to knowing what to do, it's really easy for somebody to freak out thinking we're being surrounded by a school of sharks being hunted by them. But if you know what you're doing, you're familiar with diving, you know the behavior of sharks, it's like, hey, wow, this is really cool. And you can take pictures of it. Like, I'm lucky at the time I was diving with my ex-wife and she was back there and I just like waved to her to get her to wave and I took a picture and she's like, oh, okay. And then I showed her the picture when we got back on the boat and she's like, oh, I go, here's a picture of you waving with a shark 5 feet behind you. And she would have freaked out if she knew that was going on at the time. But anyway, then there's braille diving. Like I mentioned, I call it braille diving with zero visibility, where you're just feeling the ground, trying to do stuff and so on, getting stuck with dolphins, knowing what to do, what not to do. But stopping, at the end of the day, all of this, I'm telling you what's going wrong, because stopping stupid is a process and an ecosystem. Everything that I just spoke about, and everybody's thinking, I mean, hopefully you're starting to see the similarities between what I'm talking about with scuba diving and what actually happens in cybersecurity as well. Because stopping stupid, much like scuba diving, it's a process. It's the same thing. And it's not just a process, it's an ecosystem. I saw this article this morning when I thought I had more time to come down here. I was reading this article by a woman at NIST, and she was talking about, oh, how companies ruin security awareness training and how security awareness training should be more approachable and things like this. And I'm sitting here thinking, it's like, and you shouldn't have like, like it should be a carrot, not a stick. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know what? Why is filling out a time card, and if you don't fill out your time card, you don't get paid, and that's okay by everybody, but telling somebody if they ruin the company's network, they shouldn't have some repercussions for doing things they shouldn't be doing? The problem is we're like looking at security awareness as just tell people what to do and in the right way, and they'll do it. And if they're not doing what we tell them, oh, we must be doing it in the wrong way. No, people will do stupid things. It's a given. I promise you, if I send a message out that said, this is a phishing message, and if you click this message, it will ruin your entire network, 3% of people will click that message. That's a given. But what you need is an ecosystem that expects 3% of people to do something wrong. And that's essentially what the dive community has done. Because if you think about it, if diving, like if we're relying upon, if 3% of divers go out and get themselves killed or seriously injured on a regular basis, the diving industry would end really, really quickly. But yet it's created an ecosystem where that doesn't happen. And frankly, you could do yourself a lot more harm scuba diving than using a computer anyway. And we still are able to have a safer environment scuba diving than on our computers. So there's a process, and the process starts from start to finish. How you train people to do things right, how you train the instructors to train people to do things right, and then the diving providers, in other words, the people who take people out and diving, there are standards for them, there are processes for them, and so on. And all of this works together with the diving instructors. And then throughout the whole industry, there's quality control. And the reason quality control is important is if you're relying, much like you have to expect students to do something wrong, you have to expect dive professionals to do something wrong as well. So think about when you how many here are certified divers, just out of curiosity, or ever went diving? Okay, only a few, which, well, surprisingly, you're in the Cayman Islands where everybody goes to get diving. I mean, it's like in Maryland, everybody supposed to have crabs there, and only the tourists really eat those crabs from Philip's Crab House. So anyway, but to actually become a certified diver, the first thing you have to do is take like dozens of hours of training. These days it's online. Before you had to sit in a class for like a couple weeks, a few hours a night. But now you pretty much do all your training online. And the training at the end of the day is how not to get yourself killed at the end of the day. I mean, they teach you a little bit about science, Boyle's Law, a little bit about that. That's just all fluff at the end. But really, most of it is to tell you how not to get yourself killed. Then what happens is after you take the materials, then you're given a quiz. And the quiz basically goes ahead and says whether or not you have retained enough information on how not to get yourself killed. And they print you up a certificate. Then you go to the dive shop of your choice, say, I have passed my class. Now, a smart school will go ahead and say, congratulations. I want you to sit down and take that test again. Sorry. I didn't even remember not to shut my phone off. That's how in a hurry I was. But anyway, so there we were. But a smart school will go ahead and they will make the student retake the test. And why? Because you expect people to have their friend who's a certified diver take the test for them so they don't have to sit through it. So a smart dive school will make sure they watch the people take the test. And then once you do that, then you fill out a medical form before they put you in the water. And the medical form is supposed to make sure you're not going to have a heart attack, you're not going to have a stroke when you get in the water and you're not otherwise impaired. And then you take actual swimming or water tests. And then what they want you to do is they want you to like swim like 200 yards. It doesn't matter how you do it. I mean, frankly, you could just like do doggy paddle and whatever, and that qualifies. Then they want you to float in the water. I think it's for like 3 minutes or 10 minutes. I can't remember how much. Do they really care? I mean, that's what all the scuba equipment's for. The only reason we want people to do that is to make sure they're not going to freak out in the water by default. That is the only reason. It has no skills requirement. It's really just to examine their mental state and comfort in water. Then once we do that, we teach them all the, how to set up the equipment, how to do things. You do it around a pool area or other really very calm area. And that's one thing. And then once they pass that, then you say, great, we're going to take you to open water in pretty much a confined area, have you go through all the skills again and do everything specifically. And what that does that make somebody a great diver? The answer is no. Frankly, before you have 10 scuba dives in, you kind of really suck at diving. It's a given because you have to like control your buoyancy intuitively and things like how you float through the water, that you're not going to go drastically up or drastically down. It just takes a while, and that's okay. But it doesn't mean that you're a great diver. It doesn't mean you're not going to get yourself killed. Really, at the end of the day, it just means that maybe that's, oh, no. Anyway, it just means that you're not going to go ahead and die by default. You at least know how to do it safely. But anyway, then like the whole dive profession, they went together and had like a curriculum developed, like what are safe skills to learn at different times. So, they have a few of the fun things like for kids, like the bubble maker, SEAL team, discover scuba diving, which is really just, okay, here's put yourself in a tank in a like reasonable area, not get yourself killed. Then, the specialties you can learn, then how to work your way through professional ranks. Now, the thing is, most people, you don't really have to know anything besides open water diving. But another thing is, if you work with good dive providers, which unfortunately a lot of dive providers don't want to do the check, like they should, if they're going to take you below 60 feet, make sure you're at least, an adventure diver certification. If you're going to go below 100 feet, they better make sure you have a deep dive certification or something like that, because you really have to know things to do right. And do you really have to know it? Anybody could go 100 feet, because in general around here, being down like in the Cayman Islands, being down 30 feet and being down like 130 feet is pretty much the same for the most part. You just get a little less fish as you go deeper, but it's really a nice gradual dive and it looks the same. But people have to do things and train you and expect and put you in situations that at least you're certified to be put into. A dive operator can ignore it, but if somebody gets themselves killed, and I could tell you, like if I'm out on a dive and somebody injures themselves in 70 feet of water, and what happens is all of a sudden they go back, they sue them, and they say, well, why did you take this person out to 70 feet? He's only an open water diver, and an open water diver without having a deep water training dive shouldn't be allowed to go below 60 feet, and so on. And that could come back to bite them. But they don't want to turn people away in many cases, and that's a risk that each dive provider has. So we'll go back to that later. Then there's risk management throughout the process. When I teach people to dive, when I have to do things, there are training standards developed. Like if I take people in the water, I'm only allowed as an instructor to take 8 people in the water at a time. Sometimes it's limited to 4 people in the water unless I bring a dive master with me, depending upon the age of the divers and so on. And then and then what happens is as there are incidents, they keep revising the standards. They keep saying, okay, well, this happened, this hasn't happened. We think it's a safe risk to do this. We've seen an incident where somebody did this, so then go ahead and you have to modify that and so on. The course curriculum has been developed and refined, what goes into the training, what goes into the dives. I have here, let's see, does that work? So these cards here, over here, those are cue cards that when I take people down to certify them as a diver or to teach them as a diver in open water for advanced certifications, these cue cards tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do, what skills I'm supposed to generate for that course at that time. And these cue cards that they print up, take it with me so I can't forget them theoretically. Risk management's embedded in every step. You have insurance, those cards I mentioned, instructors. I have to be certified to take people in as an emergency first responder certified. Usually you have to be an EFR instructor as well. We have to have first aid kits. We have to have oxygen kits. We have to have AEDs, like, the heart palpitation devices that have to be with us at all times in case something goes wrong. We have to know where the hospitals are, the hyperbaric chambers. And this all goes into every time we teach. Why do we have to know that? Because they've examined all this data on what has gone wrong and how do we manage all this risk despite the fact things will go wrong anyway, but how is the risk reasonably well contained? So this is all built into the standards. Now, I have this slide because this is an example. I'm going to assume, just for the case, this person here is a student, the one on the left side. This is the instructor watching that person trying to do a fin pivot. And then you can see, like, all these other people are sitting around, and while the instructor has to look at one person at a time, which is potentially dangerous because people will do stupid things. And I actually was in this situation, and in the corner of my eye, somebody like here decided, hey, let's look under the platform to see what's there. Despite the fact we tell them, stay on the platform until we swim around, somebody is always going to want to look under the platform. I promise that, because people do stupid things. Anyway, what happens is, if you do good risk management, like I mentioned before, when I'm a teacher, if I can, especially when I have more than 4 people, or frankly, more than 2 people if I have to, a smart instructor will bring another person, a dive master or assistant instructor, around to go ahead and watch everybody. Also, when you take them on the actual scuba dive afterwards, that person stays behind and follows everybody behind to make sure they don't, like, get lost and do other things, because people, it's kind of like, squirrel chasing and things sometimes and stuff. But anyway, that's what you do. Then also embedded in everything is insurance at every step. What dive organizations do is they make sure everybody's insured. They get cheap insurance rates. The instructor's insured, the school is insured, the dive site's insured, the boat and the staff are insured. And then there's even a policy we take out on students. The students don't know that we insure all of the students. So if something goes wrong with them, we don't know if they have health insurance or not. That's not one of the questions. But we take out, like, a policy, like $20 per student, that they don't know we're paying for them in case they get injured. So insurance is risk management, and that's embedded everywhere. And like I said before, a certification doesn't mean a diver is a safe diver. It means we have certified that at least they know how to be a safe diver if they follow what we've taught them. And that should be the same for cybersecurity users. We should be able to say, look, we know users are going to do really stupid things, but we're not going to be stupider than they are. We're going to acknowledge that they do stupid things, and we're going to train them to the best of the ability, but we're going to put an infrastructure behind them to make sure that their stupidity does not ruin the company. But again, all we know is that they are certified, that they know how not to kill themselves. They know it. It's not we're saying they're never going to kill themselves. But then training the instructors, and I had that big diagram a few slides back. There's the first level of professional was a dive master, and everybody thinks like the dive master is something like really special. At the end of the day, 80% of dive master training is like, show me you can do a fin pivot at a level 4 or 5 out of 5. Show me you can take off and remove your equipment at a level 4 out of 5, or a level 4 or 5. That's 80% of dive master training. There's a little bit on safety. There's a little bit on dive industry business and so on, but most of it is just to make sure that they have perfected it. There's also the assumption that they've already taken a rescue diver class, that they've already been EFR emergency first response certified, which means they know how to give CPR, how to do basic first aid and so on, how to handle emergencies. But basically 80% is really just basic diving skills. The one thing that is hard, and the hardest thing I ever had to do in dive training, and it sounds simple at the time, where you have to go down in a pool with a buddy, and you have to completely exchange equipment with each other while buddy breathing. That sounds really simple. I asked my Navy SEAL friend how he did. He's like, "Oh yeah, I just took a I just took a big gulp of air, and then I would just take my equipment off. I let the other guy keep doing it. Whenever I needed more air, the guy would give me his air, and so on." And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. God, was that the stupidest thing I ever thought. But I mean, I have not the same training as this my Navy SEAL friend. I thought it would be easy. It wasn't. So anyway, there's a lot of people who blow dive master training on just that test. And why do they actually do that? It's not about really a hard skill. It's really about, will you panic? That is the most thing, because some of the tests are not obvious on what they're trying to get at. Students floating in a pool. Again, the primary goal for students floating in the pool, they're not going to freak out in the water. The primary thing that a dive master exchanging equipment while buddy breathing is that they can control their panic. They can control their fear. That's what that test is for, if you ask me. But then you have the instructors. Instructor training, again, is how to do basic skills, how to teach people, how to recognize students doing things wrong, and so on. A lot is legal responsibility. A lot is quality control, advanced certifications, and so on. Then a master scuba diver trainer, which is what I'm at. It's really just a scuba instructor who's done 25 certifications and can train on 5 specialties, which I'm shocked all scuba instructors aren't, because it's really easy. But anyway, that's what I'm. And then instructor trainers, they have like higher levels, and course directors certify the actual instructors. They're the primary gatekeepers, if you want to call it that. And they also do quality control of all the other people involved. But ultimately, being a professional, like in cybersecurity, should be about adhering to and enforcing standards. And that, again, is what a good cybersecurity professional should be doing as well. Oh yeah, sorry, I just ruined my joke. What do you call the person that graduates at the bottom of their medical school class? Doctor. What do you call an instructor that's at the bottom of their class? Instructor, so on. What do you call a cybersecurity professional who doesn't even take a class? A cybersecurity professional. That's the unfortunate part. So anyway, dive agency certifying a pro, that just means that they believe the dive pro is acceptable to put the entire industry at risk. Cybersecurity people are putting their entire company at risk, theoretically, much in the same way. But really, if I'm an instructor, people have said it's okay for me to put the whole dive industry at risk. And why is that? What happens when people die during scuba diving? I mean, the stories go all over the place. They make movies about it. What was this movie, Blue Water or something, where a dive boat leaves two divers behind? That freaked people out. That's a really good way to ruin the whole dive profession. You see all these megalodon, the Meg and Meg 2, like about big sharks eating people going underwater. That's really not good publicity for the dive industry. And when somebody kills themselves scuba diving, it's really, really a bad thing. And I would argue that when there's a major cybersecurity incident, it doesn't reflect on our profession well. Think about it. When you have like a major ransomware attack, it's like, why didn't their security people do anything? When you had the Equifax breach, it's like, oh, they had a music major in charge of their cybersecurity program and things like that. There were other problems, and I'm not saying that but they go ahead and will tear you apart when there's a major incident. Dive operators, they take people on trips. They fill air tanks. They basically allow people to dive if they're going to be an independent diver. Like you could go to a dive shop here, rent equipment, and then say, I'm just going to go off a beach, and they'll let you. Provide equipment, maintain equipment, and so on. But what's risk management for them? When you walk into a dive shop, a good dive shop should go ahead, check your certification status. They want to see your card, or they can look it up online. They'll ask medical questions. Unfortunately, I didn't get a medical questionnaire here, so bad on them. They'll ask the date of your last dive, and why do they want to do that? Because if you haven't dove within the standard is 2 years, you should get a refresher class. Frankly, for many people, it's 6 months to get, because you just might not be comfortable. They don't know your use of equipment. How many times have you dove? Like if you've dove 300 times, you haven't dove for like 6 months, you're probably okay. If you've only dove like, 5 times, and the last time you dove was 2 years on a trip, they really need to make sure they give you help and stuff like that. So anyway, they want to check your equipment to make sure everything's safe. They have to have insurance on everything, responsible dive operations. Like if you're on a boat, they should be calling off people's names. They should have a dive master in the water with you, a certified captain, and so on. They should know where the medical facilities are. They should have oxygen, first aid, and so on, in case you get, oh yeah, I've also been stung by a jellyfish. That kind of sucks. And that pissed me off too. Because I was scuba diving in Oman. It's actually an interesting story. And they took us to this cove, and the cove was filled with jellyfish. And I didn't think that there was any place like this except for like in Fiji or somewhere like that. And then I'm like, and the only place I heard that you could go swimming with jellyfish is in this cove in Fiji, where they're all stuck in everything and don't have tentacles. And what happens is we get there, the guy's like, oh yeah, it's safe, they won't sting you. And I'm like sitting there and I'm watching everybody else go off the boat before I do. And I'm like just sitting there pretending to check my air. The guy's like, are you okay? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just, I just want to make sure I didn't hear screaming before I went in myself. That's my risk management. Then I finally go in, and then we're coming back in the cove, and I get there, and what happens is all of a sudden I feel a really painful thing on my hand. And I go back to the dive boat because it's right there. And then he's like, oh yeah, you should be more careful. I'm like looking for a stinging jellyfish in a lagoon with 100,000 jellyfish. He's like, yeah. I'm like, dive master of the year right there, people. Anyway, so quality control. Quality control is embedded within the entire industry. There's major scuba organizations like PADI, like SSI, and so on. And these people, whenever there's an incident, they go back and investigate the incident. They figured out what happened, what were the enabling factors. And when you do incident responses, you should be doing the exact same thing. When a user clicks on a phishing message, you should be asking yourself, why did that user click on a phishing message? And I'll give you a quick aside. I was once investigating, if you actually want something funny, Google Ira Winkler and Syrian Electronic Army, and you could throw in cockroach. It's a really good, you can do that now while you're waiting. But anyway, I would investigate Syrian Electronic Army Army hacking incidents. And one of them, they broke into a multi-billion-dollar company, and one of the people who fell for a phishing message was the CFO. I went to the CFO. I go, this looks like an obvious phishing message. I go, this is going to sound bad, but you're a smart guy. Why did you fall for this crap? And the guy was like, well, I woke up at 6 a.m. in the morning, opened up my iPhone, saw a message saying we were mentioned in the BBC. The guy, by the way, was British, working in New York. They really targeted the guy. He's like, I opened it up, and I clicked on the link and entered my credentials. I'm like, well, don't you know how to check for malicious links on your iPhone? He's like, no. And then we went through all their top-tier cybersecurity awareness training, and none of the videos they had them watch or any of the training said anything about how to check for the validity of links on mobile devices. So we had to put an emergency cybersecurity program in place on how to check malicious links on mobile devices, as an example. And those are only things you do when you do a detailed incident investigation, down to why did people do something you think is stupid, and so on. And that's what dive industry does. They handle complaints about teachers doing bad things, and God, I can give them dozens of complaints. There's a disciplinary process where they go ahead and investigate. They can pull or suspend certifications of instructors, professionals, dive operators, and so on. They do periodic inspections, and this is built into everything that's done, just to make sure the industry is not going to go out of business because somebody leaves somebody at a dive site, or somebody gets somebody killed because they took a first-time diver and put them in 130 feet of water. So anyway, if there is a lawsuit, with all the risk management in place, they contact insurance, they go ahead, they cite training standards, like if somebody gets harmed, they go back. There's cards that when I certify people, there are cards that PADI prints up that has students initial that, yes, they are initialing that, yes, I made sure they know how to do this skill, this skill, this skill, this skill. Because if somebody gets killed, their family will try to sue who's ever there. I'm not saying rightfully or wrongfully so, but they will try to sue them. And they will drag everybody in from start to finish. The person who first certified that person 20 years ago will be part of the lawsuit. And then you have to break out the trading cards and said, well, this person died because they didn't do a slow ascent, and they initial that they were told how to do a slow ascent, and I witnessed them doing a slow ascent. So therefore, they knew what to do, they just didn't do it, and I'm off the hook. Bye. And that's the type of things that you have to do from a risk management perspective, where the dive industry is really teetering on one incident. And just for example, when you're talking about that, how many people heard of Steve Irwin, crocodile hunter? How was Steve Irwin killed? Stingray. You have people stepping on stingrays, thousands of people a day stepping on stingrays, not getting killed. How was Steve Irwin got killed? And this week, they did an after accident, and because I was a volunteer diver for the National Aquarium in Baltimore, they actually went through this because we dove with stingrays on a daily basis. And what they said was they put a camera in front of a stingray on the bottom of the water, and then Steve Irwin wanted to come on top so it looked like a cool picture of Steve Irwin diving, coming right into the camera on top of the stingray. So there you had a stingray trapped with a guy 6 inches above him, hovering over him, trapping him. And a stingray, what's the first thing they do? They jump, and their tail goes up, and they try to run away. That's what happened. That's why Steve Irwin, advanced medical handler, got himself killed. And that's what happens when people do stupid things. Anyway. So, oh yeah, and besides all this, people hate compliance. Compliance seems like a-holes. Sorry, I'm not cursing that much today. I'll try not to. But diving is statistically safer than bowling. That is a true story. So anyway, keep that in mind when you start looking at all the standards, all the compliance, all the quality controls, and so on. The whole industry, and this is why I'm saying this, the whole industry is basically relying upon each other. That if somebody does something right or wrong, it can seriously impact the whole industry. If a dive operator gives people bad equipment that just fails at 100 feet, that's going to ruin it because it will be news stories. They will make movies out of this and so on. It's a $5 billion industry. That doesn't include the tourism. That doesn't include, for example, all the people traveling here to Grand Cayman and other places. It's all because of risk management from start to finish, and the organizations that oversee this that really go ahead and maintain the whole industry. Oh yeah, I know. It's 3 minutes, 40 seconds, by the way, not 5. So anyway, if one element fails, they're all going to fail. Like cybersecurity. So general lessons, science is embedded in everything in diving, by the way. Don't panic the small stuff, because you will have like leaky air masks, you will have leaky masks, you will have like equipment that isn't operating perfectly and stuff. And you just go ahead and go with the flow and mellow out. On the other hand, sometimes the small stuff really can become big stuff, where if all of a sudden you see like a slow leak, and sometimes a hose will pop all of a sudden. So you got to make sure that those things are accounted for. It takes a while to get things right. Like I mentioned, new scuba divers, no matter what, no matter how good they think they are, they're going to be a mess for like the first 10 to 25 dives. Also, the big thing, the things that sound really, really cool aren't. Like I could tell you, for example, that deep diving to me really sucks. Going down, like everybody was asking me, so how low do you go? I'm like, well, I've gone 130 feet. They're like, wow, that's cool. I go, no, it really sucks. There's not a lot of light there. There's not a lot of coral there. Basically, all the cool stuff is like, 30 to 60 feet in general. That's where I really like to dive. There's another guy. We were on a dive trip. Christopher Peacock is on this trip. And there was this guy who was wearing a dive knife on his leg, which looks really cool. He was even wearing it exactly where they tell you, on the inside of the leg, so you can pull it out. Only a douche, sorry, I'm trying not to curse, but only a loser really carries a dive knife if they're not going to do stuff. Like when I would maintain oyster reefs and stuff, I have like a knife that I just have by default there, with a flashlight and stuff. But you don't go around, like I have all this equipment. Look around for the people that have like 500 dives. None of them has a dive knife. If you have to rescue a sea turtle from fishing line, sure. But the average diver, especially with 25 dives, is not going to go ahead and rescue a whale. I promise that. Don't get overwhelmed. Take time to think. When things go wrong, stop and breathe. Stop and consider what's going on. Never can be too well trained. And also, you need the 10-foot view. You also need the 10,000-foot view. And that's in cybersecurity especially, because when you're diving, and I'm going to show a picture, Oh yeah, 30 feet. I'll come back to that one later. But 30 feet can be really awesome, and it can really suck. I did my checkout dives in Skinny Atlas Lake in 15 feet of water, where the visibility was about 5 feet, and the temperature of the water was 41 degrees. That really, really, really sucks, to put it mildly. But the reality is, when somebody says, oh, 30 feet, it's not the depth that everybody thinks of. You got to look at the overall conditions that say if something's good or bad. Now, going back to the 10-foot view and the 100-foot view, we were diving earlier this week, I guess it was Tuesday. And what happened was, it was near the end of the dive. I was running low on air, so I stay higher because that conserves air a little bit better. And what happened was, everybody else was low down looking at the coral and everything. And because I was up higher, I was able to see something that people wasn't. And all of a sudden, so anyway, if you can look there, there's actually like an eagle ray. And it looks really, really, and that's like probably like 6 to 8 feet wide. But nobody else was able to see that because they were looking down on the coral. And so finally, we had got the instructors or the dive master's attention, and he was able to go ahead and get a few people to get the attention. But that only happens when you're looking carefully at the things that matter to most people, but you're also looking around all the time and taking a higher level view. So anyway, there's another thing I'll quickly say, because I'm out of time, but he did give me another minute, 20 seconds. I asked my friend Stu, the Navy SEAL that I mentioned, and so I used him on consulting assignments for physical security. And one of the clients, they like talking to Navy SEALs because they think it makes them sound cool because they're talking to them. And they asked Stu, so which was harder, the training you went through or being in the field? And Stu's like, and I was expecting Stu to say the training, like with all the hell they put them through, literally. And Stu surprised me. He goes, oh, being in the field easily. I go, what? He's like, nobody ever pulled me out of the water when I had hypothermia, when I was trying to mine chips, that type of stuff. And that's the type of thing you don't think about. So again, the training, as hard as you can get, is really, really important, because that way you're trained for when things go really, really wrong. I do want to go ahead. I don't really have time to go in, but Patty, one of the certifying people, joke, like the course director I had, who was a curmudgeon, he's like, yeah, Patty should stand for put another dollar in. And I'm like thinking, that put another dollar in is the only thing keeping you in business, because he was able to go ahead and he made a lot of business by going to different colleges around Maryland and teaching the students at those colleges scuba diving. And the only reason he was able to do that was Patty spent a lot of money to have scuba diving as a class that goes ahead and is able to get college credit for, and that had colleges then wanting to bring scuba diving in. If nothing else, that one thing he hated paying them money for was what made his whole business, whether he wanted to admit it or not. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, but I don't have time to go into. I'll leave you with this thought. This is actually, I saw this when I was taking flight lessons. And it said the sign of an outstanding diver is one who never gets into a position where they have to use their outstanding skills. I saw it originally where it said pilot. But anyway, same thing with diving. Same thing with cybersecurity professional. Don't get in the position where you have to use your outstanding skills. Again, for lack of a better term, if you haven't got it now, pretty much everything I said replaced scuba diving with cybersecurity. And today, I just love this one, so I had to add that. Otherwise, for your reading pleasure, those are my books. Buy them. They're awesome. And thanks. I don't think I have time for questions, but if they want me to, I'll take them. Well, yeah, she has a question. I'll do that because nobody else is here now. You can start getting on. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so just a quick question. Because first of all, Ira, there's no way I'll go down. Don't take offense for that. But so I just said, dive instructors, they're not different from cybersecurity educators. They're aware of the typical threats. However, the waters and temperatures change. How does one prepare for that? No different than unknown cyber security threats. In addition to the training, the ever-changing landscape, obviously, sorry, okay. So in addition to the training and the forever changing landscape with respect to cybersecurity, what are your best practice recommendations on how often
You should provide training for your end users, no different than you would for diving and refresh courses.
So that's actually a question. I have really, really strong opinions, having written Security Awareness for Dummies and You Can't Stop Stupid. I'm a big believer in security awareness, so don't get me wrong. The problem is they look at it, they're trying to make a tactic a strategy. Security awareness is a tactic within a larger strategy to mitigate the whole concept of user risk, much like teaching people how to dive is a tactic in making a strategy of a safe dive industry. So to that thing, what's the right period? There should be both passive and active methods of training people. You should have constant reminders throughout. You should have nudges embedded. You should have good, like for example, email messages should make use of those banners that say external message versus internal message and so on. That's a constant reminder for people to be on the lookout. You should have people, for example, like posters, newsletters. They're not great, but they provide some sort of reminder. And then you do have to have, because of industry standards, you have to have monthly training or whatever your auditors tell you to have. I frankly think the quality is more important than the quantity. And I think most security awareness training sucks royally, to put it mildly. And bad training is useless and frankly harmful because people are offended by taking bad training. I should not have to take my SOC manager and give him the same training I'm giving to the person in the mailroom. And that's what we're doing in this profession. So that's an example of things that need to be improved, but you need a constant flow of the right information in the right format. And it's not just a one-time thing. When you get on a dive boat, they always reiterate, you're going in the water, here's what you need to know now. Here's what you need to do, safety stop. You need to do this. And even in the water, they're telling you to do a safety stop. So it's embedded as people are doing things, and that's really what we need to be doing, embedding awareness in practices as we're doing it, not just in be aware because there's evil hackers out there. Because people are too afraid of the hackers and they're making mistakes that cost you more than the hackers ever will. And he was talking about my Knights and Dragons. I told him, everybody's afraid about the big, horrible dragons when they should be afraid of the rats and cockroaches with the fleas that cause the bubonic plague. The Middle Ages were never ruined by dragons. They were ruined by rats. And we need to make sure we're taking care of the rats, not the dragons. Anyway, hopefully, I went way over. I apologize to the next one. Thanks.